Good morning and welcome to Cosmic Conversations here on Facebook Live and on the Open Space YouTube channel. My name is Ryan White. I'm the Senior Director of Morrison Planetarium and Science Visualization. It's my great pleasure today to be joined by Jen Blank from the Blue Marble Science Institute of Space Institute, of Science, as well as NASA Ames. Thanks for joining us, Jen.
Great to be here, Ryan.
Awesome. So this is our chance to kind of talk science with an expert, and Jen has got a great combination of how we bring work here on Earth out into space to understand what, in this case, a planet like Mars looks like, or what the possibility of life is on Mars. So thanks for joining us, Jen. And I think maybe you had a little bit of introductory material for us to kind of get into the groove on this topic.
I do. So I don't know if I should start sharing my
if you want to start doing that. And actually, I mean, I think when we were setting this up, you made a kind of interesting comment. You said that one of the things that you like to do is to be able to go and do science where you can actually touch the science. And I thought that was a really
So I think I was fortunate enough to work on the Curiosity science team for many years, and it never got tiring, never old. But at the same time, you're working just sort of like we are in the pandemic, remotely, working with people from all over the planet, with many different windows open as you're trying to multitask. And I really, I started out as a geologist, and I started out crawling over rocks and picking up treasures. And I really find that that's my root. My roots is my roots. And I these days I look for projects that will take me outside. And I rationalize that by saying, this is what Mars might have looked like, or this is what we might find on another planet, whether it's in our solar system or beyond. Exactly.
Yeah, it's great. I think it's amazing too that we can think about places on Earth that can teach us about Mars. And I had never even thought until we started talking about this current project that you're working on about how caves can help illuminate this question of life on Mars. So thanks for giving us some interesting insight.
Thanks, Ryan. I have to qualify that by saying we don't know for sure, but we were able, after a few tries, my team and I, to convince NASA to fund us as having potential for a place on Mars where we might be able to find current life or evidence of past life.
So it's at least an interesting question, I guess.
Yeah, right. we did have to try more than once, which I guess is pretty typical these days.
Right.
But so here's my first picture in it. A cosmic conversation with you, Ryan. But this is, you might wonder what this is. And this is a picture of a surface of the inside of a lava tube. And it's taken in with a near infrared light and, near UV, sorry. And it's funny because we tried around different wavelengths of UV light, and the ones that gave us the most response for our human eyes were actually the same frequency that we used to detect pee-pee on the carpet. So,
this is CSI kind of wavelengths.
Yeah, we got all these fancy lights, and then it turned out that the $10 pee-pee light from Amazon worked pretty well. So this is like 365 nanometers.
Good to look at all your possibilities, yeah.
Oops, I'm giving away my secrets. But anyway, we don't want to overspend the money, right? So here's the same picture with the light from my helmet. And you can see this is actually just the inside of a lava cave where lava's been cooled while it was still, dripping off the ceiling. And on the surface here are something we're calling, they're biofilms, and then droplets of water that are beating up on the biofilms.
Very cool.
And
so it's not like a typical cave, or is this a common kind of cave?
I'll show you more about it, and we'll talk more about where these caves are. But this is basalt is the most common type of rock on Earth. All of the ocean floors are lined with basalt. Hawaii is all basalt. And it turns out in North America, we have areas of like flood basalts where there are massive eruptions. And at the very top of Northern California, we have a big shield volcano, like Hawaii type volcano, where we have a lot of these lava tubes forming. And you need a basalt that has the right chemistry and viscosity to be able to form a lava cave. So the interior is flowing with gravity, and the top is cooling, crunching over. And so then eventually, when the lava is finished, it leaves behind a tube, and this tube protects us, or protects anything that might be in that tube from surface radiation or surface weather or changes between day and night temperatures. And so we're thinking this is an environment that persisted over long periods of geologic times, and might be a repository for like goodies on Mars or on other rocky planets.
Very, very cool.
So anyway, one thing, when the search for life, Perseverance recently landed on Mars, and it's it has with it a few instruments, with Sherlock especially, and with pixel cameras that have a higher likelihood of detecting organic compounds that could be involved in active living organisms. But the best way, another way that we study possibilities for life on other planets is by looking at environments on Earth that either we know have been persistent over long periods of geologic time or have weird extremes. So we think, how can life, if we can understand how life can persist in these weird places, this might give us a clue not only where to look on other planets, but which instruments to take with us on these missions. So, ideally, of course, we'd have an organism walk in front of our video camera and we'd say, yes, life, but it's not quite so easy.
Right.
Heck, we'd all run toward the green men if we found the little green people.
Exactly.
But anyway, so here's just a picture showing, the sort of typical ways we look for life biosignatures, whether it's something like a feature, like this is a cross-section of a stromatolite. These are living stromatolites that have been around on Earth for billions of years. They're essentially similar to corals, but they don't form a reef. They just grow in little balls, little mounds that are typically up to about 1 meter or 2 meters in diameter. Or
slow growing like layer cake, right?
Yeah, exactly. And you can see the layers in this cross-section image.
Oh, yeah.
And they're essentially some community forms an attachment to a substrate, probably a rock, and then they just kind of keep growing up toward the light. And here's another picture showing a magnetite in an organism. But most commonly, we also try to understand chemical signatures that could be distinctive of life. And it's so hard to tell what is life and what isn't. So we try to use a whole combination of all of these things: images and chemistry, and of course on Earth, bioinformatics sequencing data,
right,
to help us understand what the life is and what they're eating and what their metabolisms are doing in these environments. So just by background, what is a planetary analog? Well, that's any of these settings on Earth that allow us to do operational or physical conditions. So physical conditions are what I do, looking for what food is available to feed life and working with microbiologists to see what life is eating the food. But we can also use planetary analogs to train astronauts or to train, to practice with robots and see how they perform in these weird environments.
Very interesting.
The cool thing is that we've all been to analog environments. Now, if we could just, capture all of everyone's life experiences, that'd be great. Someone will make an amazing compendium of the best analog sites on Earth. But here I've just put up a couple examples. Like this is an Alaska River Delta, and that's very similar to the Jezero crater where Perseverance is right now. And because things are flowing so fast, organic material can get buried and then preserved that way. Here's some brown algae growing in the ice in Antarctica in the center. And then here on the right, you see microorganisms in the green. These are photosynthesizing organisms in salt crusts in the high altitude deserts in Chile. So these are all different analogs. There's never a perfect analog. And so we have to kind of pick and choose and use convincing arguments as to why our analogs are appropriate or, best.
And some of these are pretty extreme, like this really salty deserts of Chile and the pretty cold regions of Antarctica. And so why are those of particular interest for someplace?
Well, because Mars is cold, for example. So if microbes are living in the ice, they might be more similar to microbes living in cold conditions on Mars. And likewise, at the high altitude, that's higher radiation at the high altitude and slightly lower atmosphere. So, and usually much less moisture in the air. So these are all things we look at. And here's some other, like the Antarctic dry valleys is another case where they're very, very some of the driest places on Earth. Right. So now Mars is cold and dry. So could Antarctica be an analog? And in the center, you see these underwater microbialites, or these are just kind of like corals or disordered stromatolites. Those layer cakes.
Disorganized.
Disorganized, right? Living in underwater in tens of meters of water in a salty lake in Canada. And then you see a picture of the stromatolites again in Australia.
Very cool.
We're always discussing and arguing, since we haven't found life, where the best places to go, would be to look for life. And I'm really interested in Mars because I think it's most like Earth, and also because it's closer, right? I'm so excited about missions to the icy worlds of Saturn and Jupiter, but it's going to take us 6 to 8 years to get out there, even when we launch a mission. So I'm impatient. But so here's just a cartoon that one of my friends at NASA, Julie Fletcher, drew. This sort of points out some of the types of environments we think as a community might be good targets to look for life. Now, bear in mind, we haven't gone there yet on Mars. So we're, some of us are, readying ourselves and working to convince the space agencies that these would be good places to go. And you can see there's the polar and high latitude ice. There's salt deposits. These are all sort of mapping onto those analog environments I showed you. Caves in the rock, either dissolution caves like karst caves, which we haven't seen on Mars yet, or lava tubes, which we have. We've seen lots of lava tubes, or candidate lava tubes on Mars. And finally, there is water. We've inferred the presence of liquid water in the deep subsurface. So it could be, as we find on Earth, in places on Earth we found microbes that are in water that's billions of years old. Could there be that kind of life in the deep waters?
And how deep do you think that you'd have to go for life on Mars? I mean, the lava tubes would at least kind of be close to the surface, so maybe more accessible.
Yeah. So this is an argument that we make for lava tubes, is that it's a window to the subsurface that you can either squeeze into or walk into, but it only gets you to the maybe first 100 meters of the subsurface. Whereas we don't know how deep you'd have to go, Ryan, but people have estimated a few kilometers.
Wow.
Right. So if it's to reach that liquid water, it might be 10 to 15 kilometers. I mean, it's quite a bit. So there are there are plans, or other, what they call it, concepts, to drill deep into the subsurface of Mars. And there's sort of two camps, which would be better to face the challenges of getting into a lava tube, or actually face the challenges associated with drilling a kilometer or more than a kilometer. Right.
Wow.
So right now the rovers have penetrated Mars with Curiosity. It's gone 5 centimeters. So there's a
long way to go. If you're going to kilometers.
Yes, I mean, and technology is developing rapidly, so I hope it happens. Either way.
Very cool.
So here's the pause. I thought, you have your incredible software to show us Mars. Let's just have a look at Mars.
Yeah. So we're kind of starting in Mars orbit, and I think you can actually see the orbit of one of its moons here kind of in the background. But I think you were interested in showing kind of the elevation differences, and we can highlight that by sort of color coding Mars. And so the software we're using here is called OpenSpace, and it's actually a freely available software. So we'll share a link down in the chat at some point. But we can actually bring up this what we call this sort of pseudo color representation of the elevation on Mars, kind of color coded. And so I can fly around while you sort of describe what we're seeing.
Yeah. So we talk about something called Mola, which is the mean elevation of Mars, and anything in the red family is higher than that. Anything in the kind of blue-green family that you see on this globe is lower. And so if you think about the 9 missions that NASA sent to Mars, they've all been present in the sort of lower altitude, in part because NASA wants to take advantage of every scrap of atmosphere, since the Martian atmosphere is about 1,000th of that of Earth, right? It's much more, right? It's all relative. It's 6 to 8 millibars at 5 kilometers from the average depth, the blue area. So we want to take advantage of every scrap of atmosphere to help with the aerobraking as a lander or rover is coming in. So, but you can see Ryan, if you can sort of orient it to the globe. So Mars has something called the Great Martian Dichotomy. So it looks like the northern latitude is mostly in the blue zone, and also doesn't have as many craters, whereas the southern hemisphere has more of the orangey reddy color, and it seems to be older because it has more craters. And so the idea is that late in the earliest part of Mars history, there was a big impactor that actually perhaps melted a big part of Mars, and that's why you see this sort of cleaner surface on Mars. And then
mention quickly, like you can actually see the Big Dipper here. So north is
that's so cool.
Left, and so
that's really cool.
We're kind of got the northern hemisphere over here on the left hand side, and the southern hemisphere on the right hand side, just It's a
Yeah, I
not
guess.
the typical way. But I always like to say
Actually,
there's no up in space. So, like nice.
no, that's great. And I'm saying north. Whereas I guess on Mars there's ice and ice on the poles, so that helps
Right.
orient yourself. And I noticed in the introduction you could see the ice of one of the poles. I'm not sure which one. Maybe you can tell us.
Yeah,
we were doing the countdown. That was cool.
Oh yeah. So
Yeah.
actually, I don't recall which one we did, but yeah, this is the kind of more true color. But then can't quite see any ice caps there. But yeah, we can bring up our sewer color again.
Yeah, cool. And Ryan, maybe you could point out those big pimples. These are the this volcanic Tharsis region of Mars, and it's all in the red. You can see. So one of the reasons that lava tubes, where we haven't landed so much in this region, is because it is generally at higher elevation. If you go down to Olympus Mons, which is the biggest blip, that's about I think a 5 kilometer relief. It's the biggest volcano in the solar system, and what is it? Several Mount Everest.
But also interestingly, like about the size of Arizona, right?
Oh, it's okay. Is that okay?
Like
Okay, that's
big. But that's more like a Hawaiian volcano or a?
It's a shield volcano. Yeah. So,
right.
So if you were standing near near it, it would just seem like a very, very gradual slope. But from our perspective, it just seems quite enormous. But anyway, this whole red region, it turns out there are a lot of using orbital imagery. We being the Glenn Cushing and his group at the USGS Astrogeology offices in Flagstaff, Arizona, have identified more than 1,200 candidate cave sites. So we won't know if they're caves until we're actually on the ground, right? So right. They made a cave inventory, and this is a catalog. If you just search for it, candidate cave catalog, you can find their latest iteration of using machine learning and individual efforts to look for skylights and pits and features that could be lava tubes. And so in some cases, we can actually see from repeat orbit, we can see shadows. So there's definitely evidence of a void. We just don't know how extensive it is. But this gives us hope, right?
Yeah. And here I'm just bringing up just as an example of kind of this higher resolution imagery. And unfortunately, we kind of messed up, or I should say I messed up being able to get us right down to one of the candidate lava tubes. But this is an example of the kind of high resolution imagery that scientists are coming over to look for these things.
That's cool. So there's a question about, when will we wait for the sample return mission before deciding on the next plan of action for where to explore. I assume, Caroline, you're talking about on Mars. And, I don't know the answer to that. Only NASA headquarters people do. But you're absolutely right that right now NASA has committed, and also ESA has committed to a roadmap for Mars that involves Mars sample return. So this means that Perseverance has a way to collect things, just small tiny little tubes, and they're making a carousel of tube samples, and then they'll drop that off, and then another mission will essentially ESA will send a rocket and a rover to collect that, and then that will launch off, and that's a plan for the next 10 years. So I think it takes about 10 years or more to get a mission to Mars going. So my hope is that there will be plans for the next steps, either with NASA or ESA or other space agencies or the private sector. But yeah, we think, we are hoping to go to lava tubes on Mars, but we probably won't be until the next decade.
Wow.
So, but the moon is closer, and I'm a huge advocate for practicing on the moon.
Right. Yes.
Both for astronauts and also, let's figure out how to get in those lava tube caves on the moon. Just that we don't expect to find life there.
Very cool.
So cool.
I think we can go back to your presentation too, and maybe explore that in a little more detail.
Okay, so this is the Mola. I'm just starting off with the same. This is the flattened version of what Ryan was showing you. You can see the sort of four most obvious volcanoes over here, and then the northern latitudes versus the southern. And on top of this, I've just put the white dots indicate different places where NASA has landed, either landers or rovers. And here's this is where Perseverance just landed, and here's where this is where Curiosity is still working after, wow. 9 years?
Yeah.
8 years? 8 years? Anyway, fantastic. And this is where the InSight lander, where they're listening to the Mars earthquakes, or Mars quakes.
And again, all of
Okay.
those are kind of in that sort of maybe on the border
Yeah.
between the higher elevation stuff, but they're all kind of in that
Yeah.
nice, safe blue area with lots of atmosphere to make it easier to land.
Yeah. And so, I have talked with some of the entry, descent, and landing JPL engineers saying, is it possible, like, when can we land on the volcano? And they said, hey, Jen, calm down. It's not impossible. It's just that when they're thinking about risk, they want to minimize. I mean, it's so risky to go to space, period. So they want to minimize the risk, and it's less risk to land at these lower altitudes. But we can land at slightly higher altitudes. And when I'll show you the sort of a figure with a cave distribution here, this is just focusing in on those 4 major volcanoes. All the little dots show locations of candidate caves. But there are about maybe 10 to 15% of these candidate cave locations are actually in altitudes that are less than 1,000 meters above this mean average value. So those would be viable options for caves.
Cool.
Or for cave missions, right? And here you can see the diameters of like roughly, very, very small to 1 to 200 meters in diameter. And these are skylights that we found from orbit. And I think in this case, this one was discovered by an elementary school class who spent time looking at all of the data available on the public database. So that's
great.
That must have been pretty exciting.
That's very cool. Yeah, because it can be tricky. I mean, there's so much data. I think that's what's kind of mind-blowing about it, is the number of images and things like that.
I know. And as our, deep learning skills and as the AIs get more assistance from us to perform better,
right.
It gets easier and easier to process these data. But you're absolutely right. I mean, even as individuals working in a small field area, it's hard. But it's cool. That means that there will be so much more data to mine going forward.
Right.
Just even a bigger and bigger trail of data debris in a good way.
Yeah.
Anyway, here's a picture of comparing these pit craters and chains and skylights on Mars on the bottom to a similar type of feature in New Mexico. And so you can see, we might not see this on the ground, but these features are sort of similar. And here's just a blow up of the skylight in New Mexico and a skylight in RCA Mons on Mars. But yeah, that's a really nice pattern.
So the one with the plants is New Mexico.
Yes, the one with the plants is New Mexico. and here in Omaha, yeah. But that's another basaltic region in the U.S. where there are a lot of lava caves. And here's a similar area on Mars, showing just another example of these sort of little pits and divots that form a polka dot line. It almost looks like Morse code. And then on the right, you see the place we're going to go to, our Lavabeds National Monument Field Area. But from the sky, you can see these same types of features there that indicate collapses from former flow channels and lava tubes. So caves, you might wonder, caves, they're risky, right? First, as I mentioned, we don't know they're there until we actually go on the ground. Although, we're waiting for the Ingenuity helicopter, because in part of our plan, it's like we're going to have helicopters flying into the caves before the bigger robot goes. So then how do you get in? And so there are several concepts in development for lowering a robot in with on a tether, or working robots in tandem to lower them in. But it is hard to get in, even if you're a human trying to walk in a cave. Only in some rare cases do you have nice entry points.
Right.
Or in the case of the cave we work in, there are actually steps. But oops.
Naturally,
this is where the analog falls a little short. But anyway, so the challenge of getting inside, and then also, of course, once you're inside, you're out of line of sight communication. So how do you communicate with the surface? And if something goes wrong, the people listening will just get nothing. They won't really know what's happened. So
it'll be like that. You need like a really long telephone cord kind of situation, like growing up.
That is one concept, but another concept is that either you have robots working together, so some will stay near the entrance to be safe, or you have robots that can actually eject a small radio transponder. I say, robots are pooping out a little radio, and they could leave little breadcrumbs or little. I mean, I've seen some of these transponders, and they're sort of built to act like cats, where they are ejected, and then they have sort of a weight, so they land on the bottom, where they land with the antenna pointing up. So I know my robot friends don't like me when I say, or don't like when I say, the robot's pooping out a transponder. But anyway,
breadcrumbs are good.
yeah. Oh yes. Anyway, okay. So, but this leads me to the project I want to share with you today, and that is this. It's called Braille, and it's in true NASA fashion. It stands for something. It's an acronym. It stands for Biologic and Resource Analog Investigations in Low Light Environments. But basically, one of my colleagues came up with this because he's like, "Well, we're working in the dark, so let's call it Braille."
Cool.
I said, "Great! If you can figure out some way, something this acronym stands for, we'll go there." So, but this is funded by the NASA Peace Star, so it's an analog research program, and most of NASA's science programs either fund, science samples or analysis of science samples or development of specific instruments. That might be a stepping stones on the way to a flight instrument, or actually data from planetary missions, right? And so this is the one program where NASA tries to meld these things, right? And so you have to have an interaction between scientists and robots, or scientists and instruments, or scientists and astronauts. And so anyway, that's how we got started here. But we chose lava caves, and we chose to try to use robots to detect life.
Very cool.
So here's a cartoon overview, and it looks a little messy, but this is my artistic effort to reduce the project into a cartoon. Essentially, it has astrobiology science, and astrobiology, anything goes. It's very interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary, and then it has a rover working in the cave here, so testing the technology of this rover and loaded with instruments. And when we first started, we were not working independently. We had little rover engineers driving the robot, but we've since made some changes. And then also we were practicing a mission simulation with a remote group of scientists in a mission ops control center, trying to direct remotely the rover inside the cave. And because we're a finite budget, we had this runner who was out of sim, who would carry a little SD card between the robot guys in the cave and the science guys in the mission ops, which is about
simulating the delay in light travel time.
Yeah, there you go. That's great. Although in this case, the mission control was at the National Park headquarters. That was about 2 miles away. So, but we could have had a walk there, and that would have been appropriate. And that's a good idea. So anyway, so we used the astrobiology science part to characterize the life in the caves. And that way we have people on the ground with their noses against the wall, collecting samples, looking at things in person. Things I like to do, right? And then seeing whether or not these remote scientists could identify similar life or what they would see, only using data that the robot sent them. So first I'm going to show you where our field site is. And this is, I think, good if you are ready to drive in.
Cool. Yeah,
is good.
We can switch over and I can show you the location here. I've sort of started with, let's see if I can bring that up.
The cool thing is that if most of the people watching are in the Bay Area, this is a less frequented cool site.
Down here, actually.
Yeah, cool. So San Francisco, and that's where we are, and then you drive up I-5 until Redding, and then turn right, and then go into eastern part of California, Northern California, right? Just we can see the Oregon border from Lavabeds.
That's cool. So wait. Is that the Oregon border? This is where, and again, much like I didn't give us the specific location on Mars.
Yeah.
Generally got us in here. I don't know if I'm in the right area.
Maybe look for this feature. I'm showing you Medicine Lake, Ryan. I don't think the viewers can see that, but you can see this really distinctive silica flow. I think that's not it yet.
Not it.
Right. Oh, that's so cool, though. But anyway, for people familiar with California, it's sort of between Lassen volcano, and then if you keep going up that same longitude line, you hit Crater Lake, and in between those two, you find Lavabeds. And Lavabeds is as a national monument. It means it was designated by a president rather than by Congress.
Very cool. All right. Well, I think I don't think I'm having much luck here, so maybe we'll switch back to you. We have our behind-the-scenes producer, Ben, who I think might be able to help us out. There we go.
Okay, cool. Well, this just shows. I'm just going to go quickly back to the place in California. See up very right near sort of the northern part of Northern California. And then we're going to zoom into this big shield volcano in California, Medicine Lake, where we have most of the volcanoes in the Cascade Mountains are something called andesite in composition. Mm-hmm. So they're kind of basalt that has more silica, and so it's become they call it a more evolved magma. It's a continental magma, and produced higher silica flows. And those are the things that give you the big eruptions, right? Because the silica makes things not want to flow. Right. But in this case, I think we're moving from the strike slip of the San Andreas Fault in Southern California to the subduction that's happening off the coast of Oregon and Washington. And in this intermediary, there's this weird tectonic extension, and that gave the basalt an opportunity to erupt here. And so Medicine Lake volcano is the source, and the flows have been, eruptions have been happening, gosh, it's a little bit under discussion, but at least for over 1 million years, so maybe the past 2 million years or so, up to that point. And Medicine Lake's also another nice place to go camping. You can go swimming. And I have the little arrow here pointed at the Medicine Lake, which is actually the old caldera of the initial the shield volcano, right? And so you can drive along dirt roads to get to Lavabeds, which is here. And Lavabeds, it's about half an hour drive. Okay. But Lavabeds takes up about 10% of this whole shield volcano area. And so it's trying to think, it's about 200 square kilometers, I think. But I think I have it on the next slide. But anyway, it has, here we go. So Medicine Lake Shield Volcano is 2,000 square kilometers, and Lavabeds about 10% of that, so about about 200 square kilometers. And then at Lavabeds, the park has identified, so this, even though it's a monument, it's managed by the National Park Service. So often we'll say park to mean monument, but they've as recently as last week, I checked in with the chief ranger, Dave Hayes, and he's said that right now they have over 900 known caves. As we've been working here, this number has been growing because a lot of volunteers with the Cave Research Foundation come out and explore and map caves. So they have over 50 kilometers of subsurface explored, and it's just an incredible place. And so they have, if you end up going to the monument, there's a campground, there's a really wonderful visitor center, and they've opened up they support visitation of about 26 caves. And they're cool. Fabulous. And so the visitor center will give you helmets and a flashlight to borrow, although of course it's nice to bring your own stuff. And you can explore, you can drive, and park a few feet from the entrance of these visitor caves. And it's great for all ages. Little kids seem to like it a lot too, because they can fit in tight places their parents might not be able to fit.
Which I'm sure is not at all terrifying.
Well, the thing that's cool about lava tubes is that they flow with gravity, so there's usually just one direction. Right. So it's hard. So if your flashlight goes out, you just try to walk uphill. Yeah. Anyway.
So I think we have a link for the Lavabeds that we'll put in chat. So if you want to learn more, people can follow that link and get to know more about it.
Okay, cool. Well, anyways, and here's a view looking north into Oregon from the research center where we stay when we work in the park. And that, I don't know if you can see that kind of hazy cloud. This is a picture taken like in 2018 when there were forest fires everywhere. And there were forest fires everywhere last year too. So there are, it's in a dry part of California, and it does suffer from forest fires. Yeah. Actually, last year, a good portion of the park burned. So it looks even more planetary-like because the green went away. But anyway, not so good. Yeah. Anyway, so the foot scientist team, these are the astrobiology scientists, we worked in 9 caves in the park. Some of them were open to the public, and some of them were what they call backcountry caves, where you're not forbidden to visit, but the park doesn't share the locations with you. So, I mean, we're working with them, so we had permits and everything. But we tried to pick caves that sort of span a range of the age, and the length of the cave, the temperature, the humidity, how much water was running through, and how, whether they were caves that were visited by the public or whether they were sort of more private caves.
So you looked at both caves that people were accessing and caves that were relatively untouched.
Yes, so I know. So we'd have families come in there and see all these weirdos in blue suits, like, what's happening? And we're like, no, it's. But also, it was really fun. I know, but it's really fun to. So sometimes people just stay and watch, and they're welcome, right? But it was interesting too to listen to people coming in the caves and realize that most of people who walk in these caves don't think about life living in the caves.
Right.
Right, because this is microbial life. I mean, right. there are bats and a few of them, and centipedes and millipedes and crickets and things like that. But we're looking for microbial life and the signatures that microbial life leaves in the caves. And it's, if once you know what to look for, it's everywhere. But if you're not expecting it,
right,
people walk by. So anyway, and the idea here, we had a diverse team, and we collected a bunch of samples in the same locations, thinking, okay, we're going to characterize the microbial life with sequencing, biology, genomic sequencing. We're going to look at the geochemistry. We're going to look at the water present, see what could be feeding the life, and look at the organic geochemistry, and put all these together and see if we can get a picture of the ecosystem of the caves. And it's interesting that it's kind of a challenging project because you're working in the dark. I mean, you really are. Yeah. But it's this hasn't been done very often when you take so many different analytical probes, to try to understand the ecosystem.
Huh.
So anyway, here's
working in the dark metaphorically, but
I know we really well, and
working in the dark.
it's amazing because there is I've gotten to know more and more of the caving community, and there's just such an incredible bunch of people who are explorers. And again, they're not looking for the life, right? But in fact, in one of our mission sims, we used people who are advanced cavers that worked in caves all around the world, but they weren't necessarily used to looking for life, and so they didn't see things that I thought were really obvious. but no disrespect, but just whatever.
Yeah. Well, I have to say, anyway, I always have that experience whenever I walk anywhere outside with a geologist, because geologists are just really good at oh yeah, that's a fossil, and that's and just things that we kind of learn to look in certain ways.
Yeah, well, I know, and I'm always looking for treasure. So I like finding treasure. Anyway, so here's just a passageway of one of the caves. You can see it's kind of gently sloping downhill. This is it's called like a bathtub lip, but essentially just shows this was the youngest flow here, and the older flows are just as the volcano's pulsing out lava. It might have a bigger pulse, and then as that pulse is waning, then you have different steps in the floor. But one thing to notice here is that look at this. It looks almost like silver and gold. I don't know if you guys can see those colors. So when I went in here and I'm like, wow, look, treasure. I'm thinking, wow, someone threw paint on the ceilings, on the walls. It's silver and gold. And in fact, there is a cave named Golden Dome, or cave. This is actually a silver cave. But in science, we call it yellow and white and tan, because it's not, gold has too much implication of chemistry, right? But, but when you go up close and look at that, you see that these are actually the surface is covered with these we're calling them biofilms. So you can't scrape them off. You have to, you scrape through them, but you can't take them off intact. And then these biofilms in turn are hydrophobic. So they have lots of little water beads that will essentially form on their surfaces. So that's pretty cool.
Oh, interesting.
And so these are the types of things we're studying, right? And when you think about what might survive on a planet, well, I mean, all these things are fascinating, but we're looking at these, but also looking at the mineral features that are left behind, because those could persist over geologic time. So now I'm going to sort of take you through some pictures to show you other features. Here's a close-up of some of that yellow biofilm. And see. And this is the picture that I started out with, just to show you again that you get a whole different perspective if you look with the
what is the
UV light.
Scale of this? Like how large is this across?
Yeah, I most of these pictures don't have scale diagrams, but think of this is a water droplet right here.
Oh, okay.
That's about the size of the diameter of your pinky.
Right.
So these are things that are a millimeter to a few millimeters in size. So they're pretty small, but when you get a community though, you get features that are many meters. And here's some ribs of a cave. And you can see things have dripped down, and there's ooze there. And then these actually are little, we call them pimples. These very, very, I guess, formal sounding terminology here. But these are actually hard. You can't scrape them off really.
Interesting.
And here's some ooze that we did sample and study. Here's other different colors of ooze. So you can see all sorts of colors of golden to brown to black in these caves. And here's some films, and look at this pattern on the left, sort of like a fractal pattern. These are microbial catalyzed mineral crusts.
Interesting.
Microbe catalyzed rather, and they come in all different colors. And here's a more of a yellow brown one. Sorry, I should say all sort of rock colors. Oh, what someone says, what's my favorite analog site I visited? Oh, I'm still looking for that one. Gives me an excuse to keep. But I love being in the caves. Some people feel claustrophobic. I love going in the caves and turning out the lights and just sitting there. I don't have too much chance to do that because usually I'm trying to direct the group. But I just think it feels really cool. And but I'd love to hear what other people. Brian, do you have a favorite site on Earth?
Well, I mean, I recently had an opportunity to spend some time in the Atacama, so that's pretty.
Oh, you did? You went?
It was an amazing place. I didn't really do astrobiology, kind of looking around, but mostly focused on like the observatories there. But it's that's just an incredible part of the world.
I would agree, and I've stayed in San Pedro de Atacama, which is near the observatories, and then worked up in El Tatio, which is like a geyser place. I mean, we're so blessed in the U.S. to have so many cool sites, right? But El Tatio is pretty neat. Have you done any cave diving? What is the deepest cave explored? Thank you. Have I done cave diving? No. I mean, I am a scuba diver, but I like open space where I don't worry. But I'm so impressed with the cave divers. I mean, I've seen the scary Hollywood movies about the things in the caves, and I mean, I shouldn't watch them. In fact, during one of our field seasons in 2019, when I had like a whole bunch of undergrads with me, one of the rangers lent us her collection of cave horror films. Some of the students stayed up like late hours at night watching these things. So I'm like, first of all, I don't need to feel that way. I need to sleep. But anyway, I didn't really answer the question. I have some other projects. I have another project where I'm working in analog environments in the Himalayas of India, and that's another site. Although you're so high in altitude there that I'm often uncomfortable physically.
Yeah.
I haven't been sick, but I just don't feel great. So, but cave diving, I mean, that's awesome. Do you do cave diving? Whoever asked the question. Anyway, here are a couple more pictures. And this is my favorite type of feature. We call them polyps, and they're little tiny speleothems that can be a millimeter or so to up to a centimeter. And these are features personally, I find they're just the most adorable things. But they're on the sides of the caves, on the floor of the caves, and also on the ceilings. And the ceilings, they take a slightly different shape. Here's some on the sides. They come in again different colors. And here's some of the ceilings. So we call when they're
all formed by life in the cave.
Yeah. So these are and this you can sort of say this is a piece that's fallen down from the ceiling where you can see the different layers, kind of like those little stromatolites, right? With the sort of layer cakes of things. But it's interesting when they're on the walls or the ceiling, they're sort of like multi. What's the word? They're sort of the polyps on the ground look smooth on the surface. When you look at them under magnification, you can see irregular surfaces. But I like these soft, smooth, kind of lumpy things, right? Whereas when you go on the ceiling, then they come bifurcated and they kind of have lots of little granularity, right? That we don't see as much on the floor polyps. But these are cool things, yeah.
Someone had actually asked a question about oceans on Mars. We might bring that back up. But so if the lava tubes that we know about are kind of more in the higher elevations, are these in places where there would have been like standing water on Mars, or is this?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. So we see from, I guess, people have pieced together ancient shorelines that outline some sort of water body like an ocean on Mars, right? And there's even an offset. So we know that there's, and also just looking at all the landform features we see on Mars, it indicates that these were formed in water, like Gale Crater, for example, all of the sedimentary and stratigraphy we see. And Gale Crater is where Curiosity is still working. But in terms of the volcanoes, they're more at higher elevation. So they probably weren't underwater, but there was probably ice. And so it's very likely that ice could still be in the caves or flowed through the caves. So there is, we think we would assume there's water. There was water, there is water ice there now. We just don't know for sure until we go. Yeah. But yeah, that's a good point. And in fact, when a lava tube cools, it cracks, right? So that's a way for water, if there was water raining on the surface or ice flowing over the top, the ice water could enter the cave through all the fractures. It doesn't have to go just through the opening, right?
Right.
So these lava caves have drips in the winter that show water essentially percolating through from the surface down into the caves.
Very cool.
Anyway, so our goal as a team really is to correlate these features going from the microbes to the minerals across different scales, whether it's in the cave wall, and here's one of my colleagues pointing to the wall, and we took a sample in the middle, and then we look at this with all sorts of different probes, including a high magnification. Here's a scanning electron microscope image on the right. And then the idea again is we're trying to make correlations that we can then say, hey, this is, if you see this, this is life. And here's just another, just showing you these polyps again, and this is what they look like in the center, and showing you this cross section. So see, it's about 2.5 millimeters. It's pretty small, and then but you can see all these like layer cake layers
Very cool.
of the polyps. And one thing that was cool to me, and I thought stromatolites, the ones you see in the oceans, they're mostly carbonate, and corals or coral reefs are carbonate. So, and carbonate is not as robust to weathering as, say, silica, right? But these things are almost all silica, so that's pretty cool. And so I was really happy. And so they're actually most similar in structure and maybe chemistry to this kind of rock here. And this is a geyserite formed from splashing and microbial activity associated with a geyser, like Old Faithful in Yellowstone or something. And I'm not sure if this is from El Tatio, but I've sampled geyserites from the Atacama near where you were, Ryan. And it's so cool. And there are silica stromatolites, right? But those I think would persist longer than the carbonate ones. So that was like, maybe, oh wow, maybe it would, maybe it's not so crazy that these caves might preserve a record of life if there was life on Mars.
Because you'd have something that's more persistent than that.
So better able to not to weather away, right? And also that's another advantage of being in the cave is that you're not getting eroded away from the surface, the harsh surface, right?
Right.
So what we did is we set up something called a mineral microbe continuum. And here we're trying to characterize this thing going from the bare rock of the basalt inside to this mineral crust, to these features. These are these coralloids and polyps, these mineral features or speleothems in the cave, to the microbial film, and then to the gushy ooze stuff. And we thought, oh, let's see if we can look at these so we can find a continuum from the geochemistry that matches with the lipid organic chemistry, that matches with the microbiology or how much DNA is present with these features, and maybe it'll all be beautiful and we can pass it to NASA. Well, the reality, of course, is that it's quite messy, and so we see some trends, and we're still working, trying to see if we can, what we can eke out from this. But this is the idea, we think, in terms of what the soft stuff going on the right, and the more and more likelihood of preservation as you move to the bare rock. And I say bare rock, but we think that all of these inside coatings of the lava caves probably are coated with later silica that's dripping through from the surface, right? Oh, bases. There's no dumb question. Are the living formations you're researching RNA or DNA based? Thank you. They have both RNA and DNA, but we actually we sample or use the ribosomal DNA. So it's the DNA that's part of the ribosome. It's what we use for something called 16S and 18S for sequencing classification, and then we all do whole microbial genome classification as well. So from that we can get indication of what species are there or what new species have never been characterized, and there are lots of these, and also what they might, if we find certain genes that we know are similar to others, we can say, oh, this is fixing carbon, or this is an autolithotroph, or so something. This is using nitrogen to make energy, right? So we're little picking away at this, right? There are lots of things we don't have answers to, right? But we're picking away at what we know and trying to put them all together in a characterization of this ecosystem.
And is it sort of like metagenomics? Do you have lots of DNA, lots of different species mixed, or are you able to isolate individual species?
Yeah. So when you do the 16S, right, that's just a sequence of, and we do it for, like if you do the 23andMe, that's what 16S, right? And that's a portion of one particular gene. And there's a certain area of bacteria and archaea and eukaryota where they also look for that portion of the gene, and then make a whole tree of life only based on that.
Wow.
So one day when the sequencing is a lot faster and easier and cheaper, we'll do whole genome everything, right?
Right.
but we don't do that yet. And when we do, it's called the metagenome analysis, the whole genome. And there you just essentially break up your sample, and then you do use statistics to try to figure out how you should put it back together. And there's also, there is some statistical scatter in that too, right? So we've done a combination where we've done a lot of the 16S because it's actually it's less expensive these days. And also it was designed to look at microbes or, this initial use, whether it's microbes in food or our guts or whatever, or in nature. And then we took a sampling of this metagenome. I know. But yeah, so it's really cool. And I have to say that I think bioinformatics is such a fascinating area, and you need to like statistics and not be afraid of crunching giant, massive data sets. Now, Ryan, this is probably something that you're familiar with as an astronomer, right. But you have to work with big data sets, right? But again, it kind of gets me away from that touching and sniffing it on the ground.
Yeah.
But I've been
not so touchy.
I know, but I've been learning to love it.
Very cool.
And I guess one thing you realize or you learn about when you do an interdisciplinary team project is it takes all of us, right? It's the whole the guys who are number crunching a lab might conclude something that doesn't make sense when you go out into the cave, and vice versa. So that's cool.
Yeah.
So anyway, I said cave entry can be challenging. So for our cave, since the limit was really, can we fit in them to get in? And so, I don't know, I'm 5'8", in non-metric terms, and I won't share my weight. But anyway, if Jen, the PI, the principal investigator, could get in, then we can go. And so here's, I'm sending off one of my interns, Daniel Milstein, to figure out how to where the opening is the biggest, so I can get into. But anyway, it just means that this might not be the best way to take your robot, right? Because the robots, they're kind of expensive. They are not quite as stretchy and flexible as we are at this point. Right. That may change, of course. Yeah. So now I'm going to go back to our little overview, and so I've sort of showed you some pictures from the astrobiology science, and now I'm going to show you a couple pictures from the tech work and the mission simulation. Right. And as I mentioned before, this is
robots in our description, so it's good we're going to get to our robots.
Oh, robots, right? So, just for the sake of time, I took out some of the bits with the first set of robots we used, but most recently we're working with a group from JPL who are using primarily these Boston Dynamics spot robots, and that's pretty exciting. So here we were driving the spot with a joystick, but more recently we're starting to work autonomously, which means we don't even have to be in mission control. We can just watch them, and they're running on their own accord, right? And this is a credit to the JPL CoStar team, who has been working for some years now to develop this autonomy capability, and they're competing in one of the current DARPA subterranean challenge, and so this is a great opportunity for them to practice. And I'm like, forget the dummy bodies and the fire extinguishers and the baseball caps. Let's look for life. Now, of course, the challenge is that the life in these caves is a little bit smaller than, say, a human dummy. Anyway, so we're still practicing. Anyway, so here's a map of the cave, and Ryan, I see it's 12:25. But are we?
Well, we could probably. We've had people who are kind of sticking with us. Maybe this would be. Could we just cut maybe to the LiDAR?
Yeah, sure. So here's a map of this cave, and now we're going to. Ryan's going to show you a map of this cave that's about half kilometer, showing you a LiDAR scan we made of this cave. This is the cave we picked for our robot activities because we can walk in and carry things in with steps that were made by the CCC in the 20s.
So this is like a point cloud. So each one of these is like a data point in terms of the three-dimensional location in the cave.
Yeah, and LiDAR map is something that just sends a laser light, a little red laser light in 360 to scan the adjacent surfaces, and from that you generate this point cloud, the distance before the light bounced back, and then we put all that together, you get this cave. This cave map.
And the color differences are different reflectivity of the.
Yeah, so we think it corresponds to temperature. We actually aren't sure because we sent we sent our giant data pile out to the makers of the LiDAR instrument, this company Ames, and they picked the color. But yeah, we think it's actually maybe the moisture on parts of the cave would attenuate that signal.
Right.
So this is where we take the robots.
And you said that this was done pretty quickly too.
Yeah, the robot is making a cave map in real time, but to generate this map we're seeing, actually a human walked through to the end.
Oh, this one, okay.
So, yeah, but what's cool about the working with the JPL group is they actually are generating a map. The robot is generating a map in real time with an off-the-shelf RealSense, right? So they have a Velodyne, which is a very expensive LiDAR instrument, and then they have a RealSense that I have on my shelf. It's a $100 Amazon toy you can get and play with. So that's pretty cool. All right, that's neat. So anyway, we start out with a hand-drawn cave map that I show you here, and this is a very nice one. There's some that are rougher, and you can see here's a cross section showing that we go down to only about 20 meters underground, the deepest point of the tube. But we picked this tube because it was a nice, pretty flat one. We can stand up many parts of it, most parts, and so it's a great place to work and test the robot. But it has all the same features of life we're looking for. So now I'm going to show you the robots a little bit. I think this would be a great place to show that next movie.
Yeah.
Which you're doing cool.
Very nice.
So here's Spot, and see Spot can walk in the cave, which is pretty awesome. And this Curiosity weighs a ton, right? Or weighs a ton, or Perseverance weighs a ton. This robot with its payload weighs about 35 kilos.
Wow.
And that was a metric ton. So the rovers were like a metric ton.
Right.
And so this is 35 kilos with instruments. And see, it can walk over cracks. It could walk up to, this is a ledge of the cave. Look for, this has mostly thermal cameras and spectrometers on it. But it's very careful. It has Vibram soles on its feet. And, I was like, is it going to stick to the lava? But no, it's just, I'm sort of gobsmacked at how awesome it was. And here's a feature that's about, a meter and a half. It's called a lava fall, so a lava flow that went over an obstacle. And Spot went right down it. By contrast, the wheeled robot, the JPL put a wheeled robot down, and that had troubles and crashed.
And so you're just giving it like general directions, and that it's figuring out how to actually work its way.
Well, in our initial cases, we had a Caltech grad student driving it.
Okay.
Yes, Amanda is driving the robot. But what we're doing now is actually this robot is it's able to move itself, and so it's sending information back to either other robots or way stations that are showing the maps in real time, and it's exploring. So it's deciding itself where to go. And that's our new mission sim, which we don't have to have people, but it looks for targets. And over the course of 3 years, our science teams collected almost 10,000 images of these life features. And so JPL is working with those to, again, develop a machine learning algorithm that will then be loaded onto the robot to say, hey, this is life or this is not life. And so we're going to the field in May, and then again in July of this year, to test that and see how well we do. So even one success will be fabulous. How long can the robot operate on a battery charge? That's a good question. I think it's about a half an hour for these. And sometimes you can put multiple batteries on the robot.
It's not bad.
Here it is walking out. Again, it's just, to me, I don't know, Ryan, maybe I should have sped this up. But this is just so awesome. This is almost the end.
Yeah.
It's so awesome that it's able to, now it's looking at the skies. But anyway, there we go. So I'm just about done. Okay, 12:30, good. But I have another picture just showing sort of the mission ops. So we developed something called a concept of operations, or ConOps. And in this case, we're going to use 2 and maybe 3 of these Spot robots to work in tandem and send information. The vanguard, the one at the front, will be exploring and sending information to the back person, or the back robot rather, that will send it and turn information back to a hub, and then we'll help make decisions. So that could be people, or we might let it just go on its own. And we're going to do comparisons to see how much human interaction affects the differences in interpretations of what we're seeing. So it's pretty exciting.
Very cool. And
then I'll just end by showing, there's me. That's me.
Robot for scale.
I'll have to say that, I too am completely mesmerized by these little Spot robots, and would like to take one home. But meanwhile, I'm happy to play with them in the caves, and here on the left I have some stickers from NASA and Blue Marble, and then our first robot, the wheeled robot we worked with, and then now most recently this Braille co-star JPL collaboration at Lavabeds. So thanks a lot, everyone.
Yeah, thanks for joining us. I don't know if we have a few more questions to kind of wrap up with. We can certainly address those. Otherwise, again, thank you for spending some time with us and describing this just kind of amazing project. I mean, I don't know, caves, robots, Mars, it ticks all the boxes. So, thanks for that.
Yeah, thanks, Brent. I would say the takeaway is caves are cool, and there are caves on Mars, and we should go explore them with robots. And in California, we have a really amazing monument that's free, open, whatever, and let's all go. It's pretty awesome.
Absolutely. Well, again, thanks very much. I don't see any questions. Oh, we do have a question. Does robot send telemetry to the operators in real time?
Oh, yes. It does. So it can work on its own too. But in all of our activities, we have we set up a table in Valentine where the operators and they sit there and they see a map being generated in real time. So Ryan showed that movie, right? It was generated with a human walking through, but in this case, they see actually the cave map being generated on the screen where the operator is sitting. That's being sent back from the robot. But anyway, this is all only it's all possible because these guys have had to develop these technologies to compete in the DARPA challenge, and they're doing really well. And their final challenge for the subterranean event is in September in a cave in Kentucky. So I hope they win. They won one of the challenges, but I think they're competing with their biggest competitors, Carnegie Mellon.
Yeah. So that sounds
How free is the robot in its decisions? I'm thinking of branches to get a complete picture of the tunnels. That's a good point. So we can have it in different mode, right? And I mentioned we have it in like controller mode where the Amanda's walking next to the robot and using a joystick to drive, right? Or we can have it in autonomous mode where it might make some decisions as to which way to go. And so the JPL team these days is practicing in an abandoned subway tunnel in LA. So they have to make some decisions, right? Like, if I go here, am I going to go over the edge of the platform, or am I going to run into a wall? And so we're trying to translate that, based on it's all based on the data and the algorithms generated from the data analysis, right? So we're trying to make it as autonomous as possible in the caves. A good question.
That's great. And of course, once it gets to Mars, it's going to have to be autonomous.
Yes. But the cool thing is, if we have to wait 10 years before we can go to Mars, or maybe 15, the technology is advancing so rapidly. So I think we'll be ready.
Well, excellent. And thanks again for sharing this. I look at that very cool LiDAR scan on the point cloud of the cave and think it will look amazing in Morrison Planetarium someday.
Oh, yeah, cool.
Planetarium. So we should think about that.
Would love to. And actually, Ryan, we have a sort of a small group started out as an intern who became a Braille groupie, and now he's going off to grad school. But he's worked on the project for a couple of years, and he last year worked on a VR project, taking the LiDAR scans and then actually integrating some of the science features that we've identified. So you can use an Oculus Quest and walk into Valentine and see, this is where the scientists found a cool feature.
Oh, wow. Well, then, so then we're probably halfway there. So
yeah,
cool.
Great. I'll tell them you're interested.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, go ahead. I was going to say, I'll tell them you're interested.
Definitely. It kind of does bring me to our last topic, which is, I want to thank you again, but you're also our last Cosmic Conversation, at least for a while, because we are reopening Morrison Planetarium next week. And so next Friday, we'll be busy delivering shows inside the planetarium. We won't be able to spend quite as much time with everyone here on Facebook and on YouTube. But please stay tuned on the Open Space YouTube page and on the Morrison Planetarium Facebook page, because we will still be doing some things. And I want to, again, thank our speaker, Jen Blank. My name is Ryan White, Senior Director of Morrison Planetarium and Science Visualization. Thanks for joining us today, and we'll see you online and, with any luck, maybe in person in Morrison Planetarium.